The first thing I would like to do is apologize to anyone in here who has read my stuff or watched something, and that you've lost friends, family, you got kicked out of your church, or whatever. It's not my fault. I didn't force you to read it. I didn't force you to buy it. And so forth. So, and I've always told people that I write for me. I'm really not writing for other people. Writing is kind of a process of forcing you to think through things in much more detail. And so I write for myself. I want to know, and I ask questions. And so the only way you can figure out that is to do a lot of research and writing and force yourself to deal with the particulars. And so that's what I do. And you just happened to come along and wanted to do the same thing. You want to find out, you had questions, and on the result of those questions, you decided, hey, I need to go and find some information. I heard this or heard that. So I want to apologize, but I'm not sorry. But the thing about this video series I did, a mutual friend of Kirk Cameron and myself was Marshall Foster. I knew Marshall Foster from the early 1980s, and Marshall has always been involved in America's Christian Heritage. He would do tours on America's Christian Heritage. You may have seen there was a series that he did. He went to England and saw this statue, and Monumental. I don't know if you've ever saw the film Monumental. That was Kirk Cameron had done that, and he was inspired to do that through Marshall Foster, and because Marshall Foster had done tours in Europe and as well, and the guy in that series you see with the cap on, that was Marshall Foster, and Marshall was in talking to Kirk and said, Kirk, look, you are interested in the kind of the cultural side of things, and you've been involved in the eschatological side of things and the Left Behind series and all that. He says it's stunting your ability to take this to the next level because you've shortened your time frame in terms of your eschatology. He says, so what I want you to do is watch this video series from a friend of mine, which was me, and he watched the series that I did, where I was going through Matthew chapter 24, and it was on a series of some DVDs, and Kirk would put one of the DVDs in, and he said, that sounds okay. All right, I believe that. I can see that. Puts the next one in. Okay, Then he gets to the sun, moon, and stars language, and his comment was, "There's no way that this guy can convince me that was all fulfilled before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And he put the DVD in and he watched it, and that was what flipped him, because my whole argument has always been, in all of these debates that we're having, is you better make your case biblically. And I would always ask people, what would convince you, say Matthew 24:14, that the gospel would preach in the whole world. I said, what would convince you that was fulfilled already? And it's amazing that people would give almost every example of proving the fulfillment of it, except for the very right answer, and that was, if the Bible told me that. And they would just go, well, the missionary movement's going on here. We haven't gone into all the countries. The Bible hasn't been translated into all the languages yet. And I said, well, what if the Bible said it was fulfilled already? Oh, I hadn't thought. No, they didn't. They hadn't thought about that. And it was the same thing when you look at Matthew chapter 24, dealing with the sun, moon, and stars language. Okay, what convinced Kirk? Well, because that language was used in the Old Testament. And it was used in the Old Testament, and everybody acknowledges, if you go and you look at commentaries, even by dispensationalists, that language is, symbolic language describing the fall, judgment of nations, sun, moon, and stars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what this is really all about, is getting people to go back and read the Bible. And it's what, Bob had done, they go to Zephaniah, and these guys said, oh, I haven't read this in 10 years. And then they go and pontificate on what a particular passage is going to say. But the reason they can get away with this is that there is an operating paradigm that has so captured the imagination of people that is seen to be so fundamentally correct that there's no other way of looking at this. That's the deal. And then you've got people who have a great deal of credibility who promote it, and how in the world can you dispute someone like, well, take for example, John MacArthur. John MacArthur said it, I believe it, that settles it.
Mandela effect.
Yeah, it is. It really is part of the Mandela effect. And so look at this. I just came across something here. Let me see if I can make this thing work here. Speaking of John MacArthur, there's John MacArthur. Now, let me just say something about this. A number of years ago, I was at a Christian Booksellers Association, and a friend of mine was doing some radio work, and Tim LaHaye was there. And I went over, I said, hey, Ralph, good seeing you and all that. And Ralph was one of my board members, and I've known Ralph for many years, and Tim LaHaye was there, and Ralph said, Gary, I want you to meet somebody. This is Tim LaHaye. And I had a very nice conversation with Tim LaHaye. And Tim, we were going up the escalator together, and Tim said, Gary, you're really a nice guy. And I said, why would you think otherwise? And so I just want to make something clear here. Just because I critique what somebody says about something doesn't mean that I'm against that person. I would have loved to have sat down with Tim LaHaye and talk about all kinds of things, and John MacArthur as well. This isn't the only thing I do. This isn't my only interest level. And I got involved in eschatology because I saw it was a prelude to the idea that we don't bother with the world because it's always on the cusp of some end-time speculative deal that's right around the corner. And that has an impact on ethics and the way you see the world and the way you act in the world and so forth. So I don't want this, what I'm going to show you, this is just a 3-minute clip. The two guys on the left there are the ones who are hosting this thing. This is from a much larger clip. They are I would call them two fanboys. And if you had watched their reaction to this, you would have seen that they were just as mesmerized by what MacArthur is saying here, that they offered no critical thinking whatsoever, no critical comment to anything that John MacArthur says here. That's an important deal. And in fact, you'll see there are other people here on the stage, and they didn't offer any criticism either or ask any questions. And my guess is probably because they're afraid to. You can't question certain people, and you can't question certain things about what people say. So I have a little saying, don't give anyone a reason to reject your position other than the position itself. So any criticism I have is not with John MacArthur here, it's going to be what he says. All right? So I want you to listen to this, and I want you to gear your mind with how would I answer this with somebody you run into that will use some of these types of arguments. Are you prepared to do that? That's what this is all about, because this is prevalent, this type of thinking, and most Christians out there who you've had conversations with and have tried to talk with them, they can't fit this into their grid. They have no categories for anything else other than what you're going to hear here. So 3 minutes, hopefully this works and you can hear it.
The book of Revelation in particular lays out an unmistakable eschatology, and if you follow the flow of the book of Revelation, it becomes very obvious, because the sequence of events is church age, all of a sudden you're in heaven, the saints are in heaven, all of a sudden you have all these horrible things on earth. At the end of that period of time, which is a 7-year period of time, Christ returns, you have a 1,000-year kingdom, the destruction of the creation and the new heavens and the new earth. It's the simplest chronology of any prophetic book in the entire Bible. So I don't think it's difficult. I think people get confused because there have been historically so many voices. Sure. But I think it's important, particularly today, as I was saying this morning, you are responsible to God to get your eschatology right. It's not enough to punt. You can't do that. You've got to go in there and figure it out, and when you come out, you got to know where you stand. And I think the key to getting the eschatology right is the key to getting the beginning of the story right. If your hermeneutics are the same in Genesis, you're going to be a 6-day creationist. If your hermeneutics are the same in Revelation, you're going to end up with a church age, a time of tribulation, the return of Christ, the establishment of the kingdom, the new heaven and the new earth, and it's just that simple. You almost have to go to school to get that unraveled.
Oh!
Sure. The fanboys.
Yes, well, a dispensational premillennial eschatology. You have to have 2 hermeneutics for 2 testaments in order to arrive at something other than dispensationalism. If you have 1 hermeneutic for both testaments, you will be dispensational.
Yes. And then also, Revelation as well, that your hermeneutic changes from, all the rest of the New Testament and then Revelation.
So here's my question to you. How would you answer that? Could you do it? So what I'm going to do is take you through that whole thing, hopefully, if I can pull this off. So let's begin. This was at a G3 conference about 3 years ago. And I came across it, and I just thought this would be a great teaching tool to show you, number one, what you're dealing with out there. And you know this. You've dealt with all this, with people like this. And you were there at one time. You got to be careful. Some of you who were there can be like former cigarette smokers. I smoked cigarettes for 25 years. Then I stopped. Now you need to stop right now. See, and so you've got, there's a little finesse. There's a little finesse to this thing, and your journey to this. It might have taken a long time, but just be careful with it all. So let's look at just some of the things he says. The book of Revelation lays out an unmistakable eschatology, and you can follow the flow of the book of Revelation. It becomes very obvious because the sequence of events, listen to this, because the sequence of the events is the church age. All of a sudden, you're in heaven. The saints are in heaven. And I said, okay, now remember, read through the book of Revelation. You should find that there. What's the problem? You don't. It's not there. He calls it an unmistakable eschatology that flows from Revelation alone. You should be able to pick up the book of Revelation, and everything that John MacArthur says there, you should be able to find in the book of Revelation. He also uses kind of a time indicator here. Says all of a sudden, this is going to happen. Then no prior beliefs about eschatology are necessary because, as MacArthur states, the book of Revelation in particular is a self-contained revelation that lays out an unmistakable eschatology, and you can follow the flow of the book of Revelation. So let's put this to the test using his paradigm. This is what you need to do when you deal with somebody in terms of apologetics. You need to adopt their paradigm and force them to live consistently with it. It's the same thing you do with atheists. Atheists, you're an atheist, and you believe this, this, and this, and this. So let me adopt your operating assumptions and let me apply your operating assumptions to the area of, say, like ethics. Given the fact that we've evolved over a long period of time and rape and murder or killing got us here, so therefore please give me the operating assumptions within your worldview that you can account for why rape and killing people is wrong without borrowing moral capital from the Christian worldview. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to adopt John MacArthur's assumptions here and see where we get, see where, how it comes out. He says, he went on to say, it becomes very obvious because the sequence of events is the church age. Where is the church age mentioned in the book of Revelation? Now people will say, oh, you know that the church in chapters 1, 2, and 3 is mentioned 19 times, and after chapter 3, the church is missing, so which means that the church must have been taken off the earth because the church was mentioned 19 times. And I remember going and speaking somewhere, and this woman in the audience brought that up. And I said, you know that the church isn't mentioned once in the book of Revelation. She said, well, no, the word church is there. Now, it says the churches and the church in. John to the 7 churches, chapter 1, verse 4, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches. The 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. The angel to the church in Ephesus, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches, and to the angel of the church of Smyrna, and it goes on and on and on, 19 times. So the churches in Asia Minor and 7 individual churches. But it doesn't say anything about the church universal or the church throughout the whole world. And Revelation 4, so Revelation 4:1 is used to claim that the church somehow was raptured, taken off the earth at that particular point in time. So we are now living within the gap from the end of chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 4, until Jesus returns and raptures us out. So right between there, right at chapter 4, verse 1, is in fact the beginning of the whole rapture generation. And in between the end of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4, there's a gap so far almost 2,000 years.
And growing.
And continuing to grow, yes. It continues. Daniel's 70th week is still being pushed into the future. So we have another gap between the 69th week and the 70th week. But none of this is found in the book of Revelation. You can't get any of that out of the book of Revelation. Revelation 4:1. After these things, this is John, it says, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, you come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. Who's he talking to? Not you, or me, you, but John, you. This John is the one that's taken up. And see, they manufacture this idea that the church was taken up based upon something about the use of the word church and churches in the first 3 chapters, which they then massage and mold into a completely different image based upon what the text actually says. So the you, the second person singular, refers to John. There is no verse that says the church will be taken to heaven before, in the middle of, during, or after, or before the wrath of God is poured out in a 7-year period. You don't find a pre-trib, mid-trib, partial trib, pre-wrath, post-trib having anything to do with in the 7 years. It's not found anywhere in the Bible. And what you need to do when you talk to people, how many ever saw the show Columbo? Remember Columbo? Peter Falk and that trench coat and that old Volvo that he drove, and that little cigar, and he would always come in, and he would be questioning somebody, and then he would kind of do this. I always thought R.C. Sproul was very much like the Columbo character, this sort of thing. And he would come, and he would say, hey, I got one more question. And that's what you have to do. You have to continue to do this is to question somebody, asking them to find the verse in order to support the position. So, always asking them to find it. Then we find that, I think I got all this. Yeah, then he goes on, and he says here, you have all these horrible things on earth taking place. So he's saying, look, when you read the book of Revelation, it's describing all of these horrible things that are taking place. And look, this is what I would say. John, I agree. It does describe a lot of horrible things taking place on the earth, or the land, by the way, and before that generation passed away. So now we have to go back to Matthew chapter 24, where it talks about all those horrible things that were going to take place. So we go back to Matthew 24, and you're going to have to go through that with them. And there was a great tribulation, Matthew 24:21, that took place before that generation passed away. How do we know that? Because verse 34 in Matthew 24 says this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. That's verse 34. Now you need a little bit of math. 21 comes before 34, so you know that took place before that generation passed away. And people are going to go, I never thought it, I never saw that before. And say, well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to help. I'm a helper. I'm a helper, Mr. Helper. So those horrible things were to take place soon. Now, how do we know that? From the very first verse in the book of Revelation, it tells you these things are soon to take place. And if that doesn't convince you, then just go to verse 3, which says what? The time is near. Now, if that doesn't convince you, then go to the last chapter of Revelation, chapter 22, and guess what? It says the same thing again. So now you've got bookends in the book of Revelation saying that these things were to take place shortly, or they're going to happen in a near time period. Now you always have to be one step ahead of the game here. You always have to anticipate what they're going to say, and they're going to say, "Well, time for God is different from time for us." You've heard that all the time. Yeah. It's just, and I would say to them, now let me understand something here. You do the Columbo thing. Let me understand something here. You say you interpret the Bible literally. Yes. So let's go through the Bible and find out and look at places where near and shortly and quickly are used in other contexts. So let's do that. So let's get the concordance out, then let's look and go online and do that. And so you're saying that near and shortly and quickly in these particular cases could mean their opposite. Well, no, the context tells me that. So what context here is telling you that they don't mean that there? It's pretty, and then the other question I always ask is, let's assume that God wanted to tell them that these things were going to happen soon, that the time really was near. What words would he have used? And they haven't even you might say that very carefully and make sure they're not on a ladder or something like that, because it'll blow their mind. Like, I've just lost a significant argument here because I don't know how else he would have said it. So then the next thing MacArthur goes on and says, you have a 1,000-year kingdom. That's supposedly in the book of Revelation as well. Now, 1,000 years is mentioned in Revelation 20, and I'm not going to go into all that. Listen to the podcast that Bob and I did together. It'll be up on AmericanVision.org, where we talk about Revelation 20 and the 1,000.
It's only 1 day long now.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, you could go to 2 Peter 3 and say 1,000 years is 1 day, and say, well, it's just 1 day now. So this has already taken place. So there are always ways you can manipulate the opposition onto here. But Revelation 20 does not use the word kingdom. Revelation does not describe what most people consider to be a millennium. Just because 1,000 years is said to be a millennium, it doesn't necessarily mean it's about a millennium as we understand the word millennium. I don't like using the word millennium anymore. I don't use it. I use just the 1,000 years. There's no mention of Jesus reigning on the earth in Revelation 20. That includes another rebuilt temple, animal sacrifices, and the reinstitution of circumcision. You won't find any of that in Revelation 20. And I won't read you this thing about circumcision that I asked a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary about, will there be circumcision during the 1,000 years? And listen to his opening line was, I haven't really thought about the issue of circumcision before in the light you have constructed your question. And see, that's the thing. They haven't thought through these things, but I guarantee you they will have an answer. And he did have an answer that wasn't very good. It's the Band-Aid approach to eschatology. You see a wound and you put a Band-Aid on it. You got to try to fix it. Let's see. I'm going to have to skip through this because I'm already running out of time here. All right. Then the next thing he says is, it's the simplest chronology of any prophetic book in the entire Bible. I mean, it is a chronology, but it's not simple, friends. Many Bible commentators never even approached interpreting the book of Revelation. But really, we're going to compare the book of Revelation to the chronology of Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. You want to talk about a simple chronology, that's it. It is so simple. You see this temple? It's not going to be here anymore. And let me tell you what's going to happen before it's going to be destroyed. And in fact, this generation won't pass away until all these things take place. That's pretty simple. But it's not simple enough, because the book of Revelation is so much clearer in dealing this chronology. Then he says, in fact, he said, you need to go to seminary and read a dispensational work to make the Olivet Discourse mean something other than what it states. Someone has to come to you and tell you it doesn't really mean what it says. You can listen to this interview I did with my 11-year-old granddaughter. And everything's up on AmericanVision.org. And listen to it. I asked Esther, I said, what does that say? And what does that mean? And, well, sounds like it means this. It means this. I said, yeah. So that's from an 11-year-old. And when I first became a Christian, this was back in 1973. I was a senior in college, and I was in a pub talking to an old high school friend, and he was presenting the Late Great Planet Earth. The Late Great Planet Earth came out in 1970. So I went back home, and I had my father's New Testament that they give you here in the service, and I started reading Matthew's Gospel. I didn't know better. They always tell you to read the Gospel of John first. I thought the best thing to do would be to read the first book in the New Testament. So I did that first. So I'm reading through, and I'm coming across these passages, Matthew 10:23. You will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. And I'm saying, what do I know? And Matthew 16:27-28. There's some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. Okay, get to Matthew chapter 24:34. This generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Boy, in fact, I ended up putting the whole eschatology thing on the shelf because I couldn't figure it out. And what did I know? I was just an ignorant physical education major, and I didn't know anything about the Bible, and so I have to listen to what these guys had to say about eschatology because I was completely ignorant. But you know what? I was ignorant. I was like those guys on Zephaniah. At least they had read the Bible, read it 10 years before. I hadn't read it at all. And I agree that eschatology is not a secondary issue since 25% of the Bible is prophetic. Eschatology has doctrinal, ethical, and worldview implications. What a person believes about the future matters. Your eschatology determines how you're going to live and plan in the future. And I think one of the reasons this is so dangerous is because it puts us in a time shell. We are stuck with this end time scenario that you cannot plan beyond the realities of this kind of stuff that comes out almost on a daily basis. If somebody burps in the Middle East, it's an end time event with a lot of these guys. And it's like that with everything. How do I plan 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years? How do I deal with legacy issues regarding my family? This is important stuff, and that is dangerous. Let's see. I'm going to skip this. So one of the next things he says, if your hermeneutics are the same in Revelation, you're going to end up with the church age, the tribulation, the return of Christ, the establishment of the kingdom, and the new heaven and the new earth. And it's just that simple. You also almost have to go to school to get that unraveled. And I say it's the opposite. You have to go to school to get unraveled, to get raveled by this sort of stuff. Nobody, as far as I know, nobody has come to dispensational premillennialism on their own. Nobody has. Always ask somebody how you came to this position, and they'll say, well, I was listening to this or listening to that.
Nelson's army did.
There's the one guy who comes up with it and makes it up, and then they create a Bible. The Schofield Reference Bible puts notes in it, and people just follow that, and they became pew Bibles after a while, and that's where you are. But all I know is I know numerous people who came to preterism on their own, and they asked questions on their own. And I remember running into people who said, oh, I read this years ago, and this is what I believed. So you cannot come up with the dispensational system on your own. There are always various avenues that people take, and you have to believe all kinds of things in order to make it happen. A preterist interpretation of the Bible needs only a few charts that do not include gaps, postponements, or stretched toes. You see this? This is Daniel's statue, and this guy is on his side, all right? And you will see that the four kingdoms, but then the toes are in the future. And you will see that the toes are stretched. What was that toy? Something Stretch Armstrong. This was the inspiration. This is what the inspiration was. But you look at this. And look at all this stuff up here. I know this is hard to say. I should have put this in a PowerPoint presentation. But there you see, the toes are stretched, and they're still stretching. Let me go on here. So here we go. We're getting close to the end of this. I think the key, this is what MacArthur says, I think the key to getting the eschatology right is the key to getting the beginning of the story right. If your hermeneutics are the same in Genesis, you're going to be a six-day creationist. Now this is MacArthur's position. I don't know what your position is on the creation issue. But I don't care what position you take on it, it never leads to dispensationalism. MacArthur goes on, if you change your rules of interpretation as you go, when you get to eschatology, you're lost. If the Bible doesn't mean what it says, then you're hopeless, because how do you know what it means? It says everything was created in 6 days, but it doesn't mean that really. I'm supposed to believe you and not this. It's the same in eschatology. So basically what MacArthur is saying is whatever your hermeneutic is in Genesis, you have to take that hermeneutic and apply it to the book of Revelation. And I'm saying, okay, let's do that. What do we find in Genesis chapter 1? Sun, the real sun, the one that's, like looking out the windows, that's sun's out there. The moon, the stars, living creatures, animals, and birds. I mean, the real deal now. The real deal. Human beings, man and woman. Okay, so what's your hermeneutic? What's MacArthur's hermeneutic? That's a real sun, real moon, real stars, real animals, etc., etc., etc. What do we find in Revelation? Stars falling to earth in Revelation chapter 6, verse 13. Hermeneutics, the same. Real stars in the book of Genesis, Revelation chapter 16. Are they real stars that fell to earth, will fall to earth in Revelation chapter 6, verse 13? According to John MacArthur, hermeneutics the same? Yes. Well, wait a minute. But there's a dragon that swept away a third of the stars of the heaven and threw them to the earth in chapter 12. So wait a minute. So the earth was completely destroyed in chapter 6 because if stars are falling to the earth in chapter 6, the earth was destroyed, physically gone. If a star actually got close to us, I don't know if you're familiar with the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle says that the universe is related to us. It was fine-tuned. You get the sun a little too close or a little too far away, changes everything. Everything about where we are positioned in the solar system is key to what makes all this work. So now you've got stars falling to the earth, but the stars were created in Genesis that John MacArthur says were real stars. But what are they in chapter 6, verse 13? That were falling to the earth, and then more stars thrown down to the earth by a dragon's tail. And since, he's a six-day creationist and probably believes in the whole dinosaur thing, he had those dragons. How do you fit this into your hermeneutic, John? How do you do it? And I remember David Chilton telling me. David Chilton was one of the finest writers on eschatology, Paradise Restored and Days of Vengeance, Great Tribulation, and other things. And he kind of established lots of the paradigms that a lot of full preterists believe today but don't know who David was. But I remember telling me that he sat under a hermeneutics class that John MacArthur was giving and was really excited with it. He said, "This is great." Then he sat under some of John MacArthur's talks on eschatology and remarked something like, does John MacArthur have an evil twin? Because it was like, how do you reconcile I just learned all this hermeneutic stuff from you, now you're applying it in the eschatology and it doesn't fit. And how about beasts and living creatures? Are the beasts and the living creatures in Genesis the same as the beasts in Revelation chapter 13? Are they real beasts or are they symbolic for something else? You can keep going on with this. This is one of my favorites. I was raised Roman Catholic, and so I was raised Roman Catholic. You go to Catholic church, there's always this Mary's everywhere. Jesus not so much. He is, but he's still hanging on the cross in the Catholic Church, which means that's why you have to have the sacrifice of the Mass every Sunday to keep doing all this. Protestant churches, when they don't put up they just put up crucifixes. They don't put up the whole the whole deal because the cross is empty. It's finished. In the Roman Catholic Church, it's never finished. But there's a giant woman in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. Clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And there was always there was this statue, I remember at St. Gabriel's Catholic School, there was a statue of Mary with this representation. And I've asked my dispensational friends, so are you telling me there is a giant woman out in space somewhere who's fireproof enough to be clothed with the sun, big enough to stand on the moon, and as strong as Zach and Mike Sullivan to have a crown of 12 stars on her head? And again, they'll say it's all symbolic. And I said, yeah, you're right. It is. It's symbolic. How about Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth, riding a horse that's supposed to be the second coming? Well, wait a minute. I thought in Acts chapter 1, Jesus is going to return in the same way that he went up.
Bingo.
So, where'd the horse come from? Where's the horse in all of this? How about a dragon that can be bound with a physical chain? You know, it keeps going. This was funny. Some of you may know this. This was from Hal Lindsey. This was a book that Hal Lindsey wrote in 1973. It's called There's a New World Coming, a Prophetic Odyssey. And he wrote this. He says, I have a Christian friend who was a Green Beret in Vietnam. When he first read this chapter, this is Revelation chapter 9, he said, I know what those are. I've seen hundreds of them in Vietnam. They're Cobra helicopters. That may be conjecture, Lindsay wrote, but it does give you something to think about. A Cobra helicopter does fit the sound of many chariots. My friend believes that means the torment will be kind of a nerve gas sprayed from its tail. Sure. Yeah, you can make it mean anything you want. It was interesting. You go to the book of Daniel, about they will go to and fro across the earth, and knowledge will increase and all that. And back in the 19th century, that was the locomotive. See, it was the locomotive. And I'll talk a little bit about the Wright brothers, tomorrow. A lot of people thought that the airplane was, again, part of the end times, because all of these things were going to happen in the future, nuclear weapons and all that. Everything, this is what Dr. Greg Bahnsen talked about, was newspaper exegesis. You read your Bible, you got your Bible right here, you got your newspaper, and you do this. And as you read the newspaper, you read the Bible, through this paradigm. And of course, over time, what happens? The news changes. Everything changes. And this is why you can keep coming up with new prophecy books, because everything changes enough, and people have short memories, and they just don't remember what they were told many times before. So you begin to see that this is a terrible problem within eschatology today. There's so much more that could be said about this, but much has already been said. What Bob did on Zephaniah kind of fits in with all of this. It's crazy town. You can make the Bible say anything you want if you are inconsistent with your hermeneutic. And that's what that was. That was an inconsistent. John MacArthur's view was an inconsistent hermeneutic. He's not following the hermeneutical paradigm that he established for himself. And dispensationalists don't do it. And I just would say, we need to be patient with people who go through this process, pointing this out, because they really don't know the Bible very well. And this is why Bob brought up my little Bible test. Anytime I go out and I speak to a conference or do something on Bible prophecy, and I know it's all newbies, I give them my Bible Bible test. And the point of my Bible test is these questions are Sunday school questions, and I've never had anybody get them all right. And it puts them in ooh, I really don't know my Bible very well. So when I start saying scary things to them, they say, well, maybe this guy's right, because he seems to know more than I do about this. And so I hate to laugh at this, but it is kind of funny. And we have some really funny moments here. Steve, where's Steve? You did a great job. And I knew it was you. I don't know what it was. I just said, it's got to be Steve. And it was Steve. So thank you very much.